Okay, folks. Everyone's seated. Okay, Frank Figliuzzi is the former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. In his 25 years as an FBI Special Agent, Frank held senior leadership positions in major American cities. Following Frank's FBI career, he was a security executive for General Electric, leading investigations, insider threat, and workplace violence prevention for GE's sponsorship of the Olympic Games. Frank's efforts secured GE's 300,000 employees in 180 countries. Frank is a national security analyst for NBC News. Frank was the head of the FBI's Cleveland division and the second-ranking official in the FBI's Miami division, the Bureau's fifth largest office. He later served as the FBI's chief investigator, overseeing internal inquiries and audits worldwide. Appointed an assistant director by FBI Director Robert Mueller in 2010, Frank was based at headquarters in Washington, D.C., and directed all espionage investigations across the U.S. government. Frank frequently briefed the White House, Congress, and the Attorney General, and made numerous national media appearances. Frank is most noted for leading the FBI's effort to counter economic espionage in Silicon Valley, California, overseeing major financial crimes and public corruption investigations in Miami, Florida, and Cleveland, Ohio. Serving as on-scene commander of the largest hazmat evidence recovery effort in FBI history at the Boca Raton, Florida site of the nation's first anthrax murder, and the resolution of Toledo terror plot in Toledo, Ohio. Frank has been featured in documentaries and news shows explaining the FBI's successful operation against 10 Russian sleeper agents in the United States. Now with NBC and MSNBC, Frank regularly delivers live on-air analysis across the spectrum of breaking news. He is known to many viewers for his explanations of the complex legal and national security issues surrounding the special counsel investigation of Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential campaign. Mr. Figliuzzi earned his Juris Doctorate with honors from the University of Connecticut School of Law in 1987 and a Bachelor of Arts degree from Fairfield University in 1984. Frank completed the Harvard University National Security Program for senior executives in government at the John F. Kennedy School of Government. Welcome, Frank.
I hope the introduction is longer than the presentation. I think that's probably going to be the case, but thanks for having me.
We're going to do the first hour of questioning. Frank's going to give the answers. The second hour, we will go ahead and allow everyone in this room to ask questions. And I think I emailed everyone to go ahead and make sure you got a notepad and a pen or pencil. So if you have questions, you can write them down. First question I want to ask Frank today. Are you able to interact with friends still in the intelligence community, FBI or other, to obtain non-security information that allows you to have access to much of what's going on in the community that we do not hear from the media?
That's a very polite way of saying, hey, do I know any secret classified information that I can spit this morning? I lost my clearance after my stint at General Electric, so I carry that into my corporate experience. GE was a defense contractor, so I got to keep that, and then rightfully so, no longer have it. However, I do stay in touch with my colleagues, former colleagues in the intelligence community and FBI. I also, a lot of people don't know this, but behind the scenes at NBC, I'm very plugged in to the NBC News investigative team out of New York that does an incredible job. They operate very much like an FBI squad of investigators, and they get some great stories. So I help them with their stories and investigative work as well. So that keeps me very current on not only what's happening, but what's about to happen and about to get reported.
The title of our talk is Seeking Security in an Unstable World. We are living, or are we living, in an unstable world? Why? And is it more unstable or less secure than usual?
Yeah, I mean, if we're entitling this discussion today, Seeking Security in an Unstable World. So before we make the assumptions, let's try to define our terms. I don't think we spend enough time talking about, even in our interpersonal communications, let's make sure we're on the same sheet of music. What do we mean by security? Well, last time I checked the dictionary, security was defined something like this: the state of being protected from the likelihood of danger, injury, or risk. So think about that in terms of what our nation's experiencing, what we're going through as a democracy, the state of being protected from the likelihood of danger, injury, risk. What do we mean by stability? Because we're going to talk about instability in the world. Again, basic dictionary definition is firmly fixed, unlikely to give way. Firmly fixed, unlikely to give way. So those are our terms defined. And then we can go about talking about, on a larger scale, as Ron asked, so what are some of the indicators as to whether we're more or less secure, more or less unstable? And I'll just hit some spots randomly in terms of how professionals look at risk, stability, and security. Let's start on a very global scale. Let's look at our allied relationships around the world. Who has our back? Who doesn't have our back? And here's what we see. We see internationally, increasingly, countries operating on their own individual interests. A very transactional, what's in it for me right now, decision-making capability for our allies and our adversaries. There's no longer this sense of, we're a pact, I've got your back, we move together through this journey. We don't see that happening as much as we should. We see an increase in nationalism. An increase in nationalism. Now, a lot of people will point right to President Trump and say, he's behind this increase in nationalistic fervor. I have to tell you, this is a global phenomenon. And you look no farther than the Brexit movement that we watched in the UK. But you can go around the globe and point to people being more about looking inward, less about looking outward, less about having global influence. And so we see this nationalistic fervor. Tied with that, and by the way, some of that nationalistic fervor is tied to what? The global refugee and migration crisis. Again, we're all focused squarely on the border, on Mexico, but I have to tell you, you know this from the news, this is a global issue. And some of it impacting countries severely. So we see that. Tied to that, sadly, we're seeing FBI statistics that tell us there's an increase in hate crimes and violent hate crimes around the United States and even around the world. So that makes us feel less safe, less secure. Jumping around, we can look at a DNI report. Now, this is the Director of National Intelligence. This is back when we actually had a full-time Director of National Intelligence, a guy by the name of Dan Coates, who was very good. He issued an annual report. We may never see one again. And what did the report tell us? It told us that more than ever before, this got my attention as a counterintelligence professional, more than ever before, Russia and China are working together more than any time in the last 50 years against the West. Now, that is extremely significant. Back when I was in the FBI, we would always be attuned to the possibility that Russia and China might be doing some training together. They might be sharing some intelligence with each other. This report says more than any time in the last 50 years, they are working together against us. That got my attention for sure. Since we're on the topic of Russia, they've now got a foothold in the Middle East that we handed them in the country of Syria. When we made our decision to pull out, rightly or wrongly, history will define that. They've got a platform and a staging area now in Syria that they did not have before. insecurity, feelings of stability. Let's talk about what's in the news the last 24 hours, and that's the coronavirus. So, as I said on the air yesterday on the Nicole Wallace show, this really comes down to two things for me. This is a trust issue. We have had a president who has bashed our institutions, our law enforcement and intelligence agencies for so long and for so hard that now when it's time for him to rely on institutions like the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, we don't quite see him willing to do that. If you watched the press conference yesterday evening, he was good until he had to say, no, the spread of the virus is not inevitable. Well, his chief doctors are telling him, no, it's inevitable. And then we wake up this morning to find that, yeah, no, there appears to be a community spread case in California already. So that, if we keep our eyes on that, that's going to create more and more economic instability. You're looking at tremendous economic impact of this. The International Olympic Committee says within the next 2 months, they will make a decision as to whether or not to cancel the Summer Olympics in Japan. International trade conferences are being canceled. We now have a surplus of oil and fuel that we haven't seen in the last 10 years. Why is that? Nobody's traveling. Airlines, cruises, all being canceled, conferences being canceled, and so the Saudis are actually considering stopping oil production. That's economic impact, and it's going to create increasing instability. As I got out of the car today, the Dow Jones again is down 800 points. So much for the calming press conference yesterday. Look at, since we're talking economics and trade, look at the economic issue around China and trade tensions. I talk to business leaders who are very concerned about, they're confused. Where are we vis-a-vis China? Do we have a solid trade agreement? Are we friends? Are we enemies? What's going on? And there's mixed messages there from the administration. I applaud the administration for taking on a very tough challenge with China. I'll talk about that in a second, because there's some intellectual property theft issues that the administration is trying to take on. Let's get closer to home on security and instability. Look, increasingly, we no longer feel safe in our houses of worship, our schools, shopping. And we saw it yesterday play out in a workplace violence shooting at Molson Coors in Wisconsin. 5 people dead, killed by a coworker, it appears. So there's this sense of even the sacred places that we would go to worship are no longer sacrosanct. And the America First philosophy that really helped get President Trump elected. I'm not going to get political here today. There's a lot to be said for a focus inward. We could spend a lot of money and time building our infrastructure and providing for our people. America First could have some very positive connotations, but it turns out, it looks like America First is turning into America alone. America alone in the world. We don't need anybody. We don't need NATO. We don't need trade pacts and agreements, and I think that's going to be problematic from a national security standpoint. There's good news and bad news on the terrorism front. I spent much of my career looking at terrorism issues, and there's good news there in the sense that we have been extremely successful dismantling ISIS and al-Qaeda leadership. However, there is a downside to that because they've become very decentralized. It was nice to have an organization chart that you could post on the wall for ISIS and al-Qaeda, right? Number 2, number 3, head of communications, right? Blah, 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 finance guy. We don't have those charts anymore. And that's because they're extremely decentralized. And that means we're seeing very much a lone wolf independent actor problem. And we're seeing entirely online radicalization at a speed with which we've never seen before. So you can take a young man, usually, 19, 18, put him in front of an internet computer for a week or 2, play him violent radical sermons, beheading videos, preach to him that it's time to kill the infidels, and you'll have him radicalized in 2 weeks. Ready, and by that radicalized, I mean ready to act. That's unheard of before. So good news when you're in the war against terrorism. And then, we saw, you talk about feeling of anxiety. We were on the precipice. I don't know if people in this room realize how close we were to war with the assassination of Soleimani, General Soleimani of Iran. And again, we're talking about Iran and their sponsorship of Hezbollah and how bad a guy Soleimani was. And boy, he was a bad dude. But, we'll talk about this when we get to a military section of our discussion. Previous presidents, including Bush and Obama, had the opportunity to take Soleimani out and decided not to. For this very reason, they thought it was going to make things worse, not better. And it wasn't that they were doing nothing about Soleimani. They were killing everybody around him, his operators. And they just wanted to leave him a military general in place to avoid war. But there you have it. And then, look, the last thought I have as we jumped around the globe here is, and this is much closer to home, and that's the area of trust in our information and our own social media that we spend too much time on, by the way, including myself. We indicted 24 Russians, Mueller, special counsel, for social media propaganda and hacking related to the 2016 election. It's still going on. And I'm here to tell you, you can't trust what's on your news feed, your social media, Twitter, Facebook, and we're going to get into that deeper. But so here's my quick conclusion and summary. Yes, I think we're living in an increasingly unstable world, and that makes it even harder to seek security in that environment.
How do security and stability concerns relate to the Tucson area?
Yeah, so we're jumping close to home here as we bounce around this topic. I think you can't talk about security and stability in the Tucson area without talking at least about two things. One would be the border, and you guys know it far better than I do. I've lived here just over 1 year now, and I'm getting quite an education on the border issues. But look, regardless of whether you think that the border crisis was a manufactured crisis at first, I'm in agreement that it ultimately became a real crisis in terms of the numbers of arrests that were being made. Now, I have strong opinions about the strategy that led to those arrests and the decision to criminalize border crossings, to point to a law and go, you know what, we're going to do that and not this. We're not going to turn you around. We're going to arrest you. And if you have your family and you're now an arrested criminal, the federal justice system doesn't deal with juveniles. As an FBI agent, we don't do kids. We don't have that. So what do? The system says, you got to separate the criminal from the kid. So that's a strategy. Understand that was a strategy. They knew what was coming with that. So we did manufacture a crisis, and lo and behold, we were, the U.S. government was filled to capacity and beyond. And what did we see then come out of Washington? Well, if you take a Border Patrol agent out for a couple of beers, he'll tell you something. They'll say that they began by coordinating closely with humanitarian and church groups and organizations. Some of you may be volunteers in such organizations to assist migrants and their families. And then suddenly they were told, not so much. We're not going to coordinate so much. In fact, you know what? Why don't you start releasing some of these folks out of detention at the 7-Eleven, at the bus station, at the train depot, without vetting them? So you don't know, you're not running criminal checks, you don't know who you're releasing at the corner. I have to conclude that part of this was all about hoping that some violence would happen, that they could point to. There's a phenomenon occurring here that you may not be tuned into. And that is that we're seeing a decided drop in the number of international students wanting to study in the United States. Really for the first time ever. We were the nirvana, right? Everybody wants to get that U.S. degree. And when you look at it, so that last data I looked at from ICE was a 2.7% in the number of student visas being issued, foreign student visas being issued. You say, well, what's that about? A couple of things going on. One is there's a lot better opportunity now for more attractive to stay home. I get that. But when we interview to why they're not coming or why they're not coming back, we hear fear. We hear race. We hear that they're not welcome. And we hear this, of course, a lot after Trump's ban certain countries, largely being referred to as a Muslim ban, where the Muslim students are saying, I'm not welcome here anymore. And the countries that we're talking about not sending people are Canada, South Korea, not sending. India is dropping like a rock, and then China is dropping, which is interesting. So what you say? Well, so what? Who cares? A couple of things. One is the talent pool in that group is phenomenal. So we lose that talent, and we lose the ability to retain them here in the sciences particularly, which we desperately need. The other thing is, guess what? They pay full tuition. So when they don't come, your grandkids, they pay higher prices in tuition. And then generally, we have a less diverse campus population. We become far more insular. So it's something to keep an eye on.
Okay. How do you see instability and risk reflected in the workplace?
Yeah, I'm all about risk in the corporate setting, and I can tell you that to me translates largely to intellectual property theft. And you might say, well, I don't work for a company, or I never worked for a company that had any great trade secrets. My kids don't work at a company that's into the sciences and formulas. I want you to know that I don't care where you worked. It could have been a bakery. You had a trade secret, and you may not know it. It could be the recipe to your muffins, but it doesn't matter, because what I find increasingly is that two things. Companies don't really understand what it is that makes them tick. What is the crown jewel or crown jewels that cannot walk out the door, because it poses, and that loss of that thing poses an existential threat to the company. This is about jobs. If you say, I don't care. Hey, if Raytheon loses a couple of its crown jewels, look what happens to the economics of Tucson. And companies are losing them. I follow this news closely. Coca-Cola was hurt to the tune of $106 million in loss. Do you know what was stolen? By China, by the way. Anybody follow that case? BPA-free lining to their can. So BPA, and I'm not a scientist, but BPA is bad. We don't want that inside our cans. They were doing incredible research with Sherwin-Williams paint, by the way, because I guess they have a similar can lining issue, Valspar, and they were sharing the latest research on how to avoid BPA in the lining of the can. Gone. It's gone. $106 million project. General Electric has been hit hard. They do MRI machines. GE Healthcare builds MRI machines. They do it differently than anybody else in the world. They do low cryomagnet MRI. It's gone. So I do a lot of consulting with companies on, hey, let me help you figure out what you can't afford to lose. And you'll be surprised how many will go, I don't know. I don't know what we do that's that different. I don't know. And I help them through that and build insider threat programs with that. So IP theft is a big. Glad to see it come up in the Chinese trade talks as an issue. I'm not at all satisfied that China's going to do anything about it and stop stealing from us, but they do it. The other corporate thing I see in the workplace is the increasing disparity between the haves and have-nots. And here's what I mean. I think more than ever before, when I sit down, and sometimes I get called in to do investigations of corporate workplace violence concerns. Sometimes I'm sitting across from an employee who's suspected of sabotage, IP theft. These are complicated interviews. And even just assessing somebody for a workplace violence threat. What I hear more than ever before is a keen awareness of how much the executives in the C-suite make versus what the rank and file make. And that is growing tremendously, that gap, and the knowledge of it. You know, my CEO made $20 million last year. Okay, you know, and when you're talking to an engineer who holds the crown jewels, the engineer makes 65 grand. The CEO makes 20 million. And he says, you're telling me I should be loyal to the company and I shouldn't go to the competitor? That's a tough sell. That's a tough sell. So I see that. I see growing disgruntlement. I see more stress in people's lives in the corporate world, and uncertainty about jobs, manufacturing, Trump telling you got to make your stuff in the United States, and companies going, we'd love to make our stuff in the United States. It will cost twice what it costs right now. So it sounds nice, but you're going to pay a lot more. You know, that's another discussion. There's a plus side to this, which is I talk to CEOs who say they're aware of this and they want to be better corporate citizens. They want to do right by their employees. So I think there's some good to see here. I even see CEOs saying, look, the administration the White House may be telling us we don't have to worry about polluting the environment. We're going to worry about it because we think it means being a good global citizen. I also see a real movement to get CEOs off the board of directors of their companies. So you know the title chairman and CEO. That's a real problem, I think. And I see that because there's not an independent board there. He or she picks the board members. They run the board, they run the company. It's, you know, there's no independent thought going on there. So I think there's a movement afoot. You'll see less of that happening. So I just, on the corporate end, Ron, I'm happy to see the president tackle intellectual property theft. There's been some good progress with the Department of Justice actually being more aggressive than ever, indicting Chinese individuals, government-sponsored individuals, for hacking, for IP theft. That's a good thing. And if nothing else, it sends a message that this can't continue as is. I remain cynical as to whether China will do anything about it.
What about trade imbalances with China?
Yeah, this is in the news constantly, and actually until Corona, it probably was one of the biggest factors affecting stock market performance, was this question around trade and China. And I talked to CEOs who are confused about the position on China. I don't know if you know how challenging it is to do business in China. If you want to engage in a joint venture, you're an American company, you want to make your widget in China. I don't know if you know this, but the law requires that you give up elements of your manufacturing process to China and you employ X amount of Chinese employees to do it. And case after case after case, guess what happens in about 2 or 3 years of being on the ground in China? They don't need you anymore. They've got, and so, you know, they're not paying the light bills anymore. No kidding. This is what happens. You show up one day, the lights are off, and your Chinese partners say, yeah, it's been fun, but we don't think we need you anymore. And so part of the trade negotiations with China is to get rid of that mandatory requirement that you have to cough up your manufacturing secrets. So we'll see. I'll believe that when I see it. The other thing that the coronavirus has brought up vis-a-vis China is how incredibly dependent we are in the pharmaceutical area. Our economies are intertwined tremendously. And by the way, I'm actually an advocate of intertwined economies, because I think it's less likely you go to war with someone if you both collapse. So I kind of like that idea. The problem is I don't like it with regard to critical infrastructure and essential elements of our society. So if we have to go to China for a critical cure or drug, not good. Not good, because they control the price and the distribution if they ever want to give it to us at all. And we're in that boat. And there's pending legislation right now, bipartisan legislation in Congress right now. Imagine that, bipartisan. People saying, hey, we've got to independently develop pharmaceutical capabilities inside the United States. The supply chain for goods. You say, well, we make lots of drugs inside the United States. It's where the critical components come from, in addition to the manufacturing. And strategically, China has kind of cornered the market on certain key ingredients to our pharmaceuticals.
Being a pharmacist, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, there you go.
What is the risk picture within the U.S. military?
Yeah, I have watched our institutions come under this administration, and I think no matter which way you voted in 2016, you have to acknowledge that our institutions have been under attack. And you may say, good, that's draining the swamp, but I don't trust these institutions. That'll be another discussion. But long-term damage can be done to our institutions. And one of those I get very worried about, and we have to watch very closely, perhaps more than any other, is the military. And from the assassination of General Soleimani, where if you read that story, the generals went in, top generals went into the president, said, hey, just so you know, we've got Soleimani's travel records down pretty good. We know where he is, where he's going. You have an opportunity here, and here's like the four options. We can kill the guys around him. We can continue to intercept his communications and secure the targets he's going after. We can stop his financing flow. Or, of course, we could always take him out. And, of course, the president said, yeah, we're going to kill him. The lesson there might be, don't give the president the most extreme option. But, reportedly, that shocked the generals in that room. And so you combine that with things like billions of dollars being taken from the Pentagon budget to build the wall. So I always find it amusing when the president says he's so strong on the military, he's built the military up. And the truth is that restoration of military bases, the construction and refurbishing of military schools on bases for kids, military hospitals, all being put aside to build the wall. You also combine that with the fact that we've turned over at the Secretary of Defense level now, people leaving, generals leaving, a top Navy SEAL leaving who was trying to promote order in the SEALs. We've got a fascinating thing happening in the special operations world, which is that because of our protracted presence in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, we've used special operators, SEALs, Rangers, Delta Force, like we've never used them before. They're not designed for protracted combat missions. Special operators are supposed to go in, get the job done, and get out. Right, they're a SWAT team. Thank you. Imagine the SWAT team operating 24/7 for years. Well, that's not a SWAT team anymore. And so, guess what? They have issues. They're humans. And one of the issues is, one of the things that's manifesting itself is they've got discipline problems now. There's drug use, there's theft. It happens in war if you're killing people every day for years. And so they've said, time out, we've got to restore order. Well, some young SEALs report their chief for war crimes, posing with a body that he stabbed after it was dead, before it was dead. There's argument there. And it reports that these young SEALs had to disable his gun, had to point his gun away from kids and women he was shooting, and had to make noises so that his position would be given up. They take the grand decision to report him. It's a big decision to do. And of course, the president, this guy's name is Gallagher, the president decides he's going to basically pardon him. And when the SEALs say, well, we're gonna take his trident pin, he's not going to retire as a SEAL. The president says, no, you have to give it back and restore his pay. This is telling the military, I'm not about making America stand for that which is right. and fighting war as Americans fight it. I'm about indiscriminate killing and war crimes. You're going to see this guy Gallagher rolled out at presidential campaign rallies as some kind of hero. And so what's the impact? So, well, okay, so what? What's standing in the world? And secondly, it has split the military. And unfortunately, in many regards, it's split the military between officers who understand the problems of big management and the rank and file who go, hey, maybe there's no rules. That's pretty good. So that's dangerous when officers are split from enlisted. And I get worried about the military. You had a guy in charge of policy at the DOD at Pentagon, policy for Ukraine. The poor guy who signed off on the congressionally approved aid to Ukraine. He went, yeah, Ukraine has met all of its conditions. Congress has approved the aid. Write the check. He got fired. He got fired for doing his job. What's the impact on morale at the Pentagon if you get fired for doing your job? So we've got to watch the military very, very closely.
The Secretary of Defense has turned over the National Security Advisor position. It's now in its fourth person. What's your comment on that?
Oh. I hear a summer intern is going to take the National Security Advisor position for a while. Ron, this gets into the larger issue of who's advising the president, who, if anyone, has the ability to tell the president, hey, time out, this is a bad idea. I think we've lost that capacity. I can't point to anyone right now who can tell him, you need to take a breath. We're not doing this. It's not right. And when the turnover keeps occurring, imagine working in the intel community, imagine being an ally of the United States. And you say, what's the phone number of the new guy? What's his name again? I used to pride myself on knowing every cabinet member. You know, I could name everybody, and I don't know who's on first. I don't anymore. And this process of using actings, we're going to probably see it again with a DNI, whoever that's going to be. The interim guy, ambassador to Germany, Grinnell, he's acting. And I don't really know if they have a serious candidate. I've heard some names mentioned. They all bother me for DNI. Critical role that oversees all 17 of the intelligence agencies, and is that voice to the president, right? He's the guy that goes between the intelligence agencies and the White House and the public and says, we're going to report this. We're going to task all of our agencies. A shopping list comes down every year to the intelligence agencies. I was part of the development of that shopping list. You know, gallon of milk, loaf of bread. The shopping list would say, we need this secret this year. We need to figure this out this year. Everyone collect on this. Imagine that the president says to his acting DNI, hey, I don't want any more of this crap about Russia poisoning people. Don't collect on that. And by the way, stop telling me that North Korea is building a nuclear missile. That's scaring the hell out of people. I don't want to hear that. Don't even bother collecting it. Collect over here on something else. And then the analyst trying to do their job, the CIA officer in the field risking her life to collect something of worth. And it doesn't make it up the chain. Or it gets twisted. Or you brief the House and Senate Intelligence Committee that Russia's trying to help Trump, trying to help Bernie so that Trump can beat Bernie. And the president says, you're fired. Those briefings, stop those briefings. The suppression and weaponization of intelligence. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent.
That's okay.
All right.
Yeah. As long as you're off on a tangent, I'll grab the tangent as well. One of the things you mentioned was taking money out of the military for the wall. And then they recently decided that they want to build the wall right away. So they're now taking what the government always does is bid on the wall. No more bids. We're going to build a wall, period. We're going to give out contracts whoever we want to give them to. Of course, you know they're going to give them to party loyalty. and they're going to charge 3 times what it would normally cost, and then 1/3 of that goes back to the politicians.
It's already been reported that at least one of the contractors for the wall has close ties to the Trump administration and to donations. Yeah, to donations. So that's what happens when you do away with the actual honest bidding process. The other thing is, by latest count, I have to keep inserting real news versus fake news. By latest count, how many miles of actual new wall that didn't exist previously have been built? Anybody? 12. 12 miles.
12.
Just throwing that out there. There's been a lot of reconstruction of existing wall. That's true. And that number may be as close to 200 miles almost. But new wall where it never existed, 12 miles. So when he says promises kept, good luck with that.
Okay. Does global and national risk instability reach into our homes and our personal lives?
So we've started. If we've done this right, this talk so far has been kind of an inverted pyramid. We started big on a geopolitical scale. We got into Arizona. Now we're getting into your house. And the question is, are we more insecure in our personal lives? And the internet's going to play really a big factor in this discussion now. And that's because we're more digitalized than ever. We're more online than ever. And right now, as we speak, 250,000 people are following fabricated Russian government Facebook accounts. 250,000 people have clicked follow on some fake Russian intel social media account. Do you think that's enough to throw off an election? Of course. We're going to see things we've never seen before on our home computer screens. We're going to see videos that look like Joe Biden is talking about Martians landing in his backyard. And boy, that looks like Joe Biden. Yeah, that's Joe Biden. But it's not. I mean, this is coming to a screen near you. And I mean, just have you heard about this ad that the Trump PAC is running in South Carolina right now? Well, that's good. I don't have to tell you about it. So, well, help me out if I don't have all the details, and I don't. But Obama lawsuit to stop this commercial, and the commercial is something like this. Help me out when I get this wrong, and I will. But it's you get the images of Biden, real pictures of Joe Biden. You have a voiceover of President Obama, and President Obama is describing how someone is saying anti-black rhetoric. Is that about right? So what is the conclusion that you draw in your mind? Obama's describing Biden, having anti-black rhetoric. Well, no, he's not. He's talking about somebody else. So, I mean, imagine this now on steroids, on your Twitter feed, your Google, your Facebook, and people are going to be extremely confused. Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're African American in South Carolina, you're going, wow, I didn't know Biden was a racist. President Obama says he's a racist. No, he didn't. Didn't say that. So this is the new warfare, the cyber battleground. And so when it comes to, the hacking, the DNC hack, the social media propaganda, and how it impacts you, you can't trust your social media. You've got to get your news from 3 or more sources, and you need to read your news. I have people come up to me, Frank, I watch you all the time on MSNBC, and I say, that's great, thank you, that's great. You shouldn't do that. And I said, what? I said, I want you to go subscribe to the 3 newspapers online. I want you to read, and I know this is going to pain you, but for half an hour a week at least, I want you to watch that other network. I do it. I did it last night. Yeah, I can only take 30 minutes. Yeah, but it helps. It helps this is what people are buying. And sometimes there's solid reporting. Like last night, there was something I'd never heard. Sean Hannity, I watched him for 30 minutes. I did. And he had this amazing story, just breaking news. A former FBI unit chief has spilled the beans on all the abuses of FISA, never mind FISA, that the FBI has secretly broke into some reporters, CBS reporters' computer and installed listening equipment. And I go, wow, that's devastating. I start looking it up. There's a lawsuit. I go, no, that's I'm going to follow it, but that just can't be. No one else is reporting it. That's a clue, by the way. My association with NBC has taught me lots about how journalists work. I have to tell you, 3, 4, 5 sources required by a producer or editor before something's reported. And even then, I've been impressed. I'll give something solid that I pick up to NBC, and they'll say, we love you, Frank. We believe you 100%. We need 3 more sources. And so when you see a news organization reporting something that no one else will touch, that's a clue. So we'll see. But look, close to home, online. Let's talk about online dating. It's the future. It's the future. It's the present. Almost no matter what age group you're in, that's fine. It actually expands your pool. But understand that that's the place where people can portray how they want to be, not how they really are. So it just means you have to vet people, just like we're vetting candidates right now. And by the way, I don't think we're vetting them well enough. That's another question. But you have to be very, very careful. And then in terms of the age demographic in this room, we have to be concerned about elder fraud. And the fact is, especially when I deal with a group that is this savvy, and you guys are online, you've got it smart, but that means the more digitalized you are, the more vulnerable you are, because the more information you have that's out there. How many of you in this room have been notified that your personal information has been breached at some point in your life? Yeah, me at least 3 times. And do you know that half of Americans' data was breached in the Equifax compromise? Half of America. And I could teach a seminar on what the Chinese are going to do with all of our data, but that's another, and that was China, by the way. So we're losing the sense of privacy. If you were to define privacy, we started by defining security and stability. Try to define privacy today when many people are going, look, the Chinese have my social security number. They have they have everything. I deal with corporate CEOs, mega corporations, who I say, look, on that next trip to China, I want you to take a loaner device with only the data you need for that meeting. I want you to take a loaner phone. I want you to go and clean. And some of them throw up their hands and go, I've been to China 12 times. They have me. They own me. They have me. My data is gone. My laptop, they took my laptop at customs in China. They own it. And they give up. And I'm here to say, don't give up on this issue of privacy. Pay for malware detection. When that little warning comes up that it's time to renew your antivirus, you better renew it. It's worth it.
Credit card information as well.
Yeah, credit card. Well, here's some good news. Online banking has gotten much better in terms of security. It really has. I stayed away from it up until just a couple of years ago when I became more satisfied that there are good firewalls in place and really strong encryption, etc. Doesn't mean it's not vulnerable. It's not vulnerable. My wife still refuses. She refuses to engage in the online banking for the most part, and it's just an independent decision that you have to make, and you have to be aware of simple things like the credit card skimming. It happened to me here several months ago at an unnamed sushi restaurant. I paid with my credit card, and I lost sight of it, meaning that the waiter went and took it somewhere, The next day, my credit card company calls me, says, you know, have you bought $200 worth of gasoline in Nigeria? No. No, they haven't. They got me. They got me. And that's a skim. That's you know, the devices they have that skim your card. They put it on blank stock, and they use it online and charge it up till somebody stops it. But, whoa.
Okay.
We'll talk. Yeah, we'll talk after.
What are we seeing in our own governments?
All right, I already touched on this in terms of institutions being attacked. This is personal for me. I spent 25 years dedicated to the Department of Justice, the FBI. So it pains me when I see the lashing out. I am not here to tell you, by the way, that they are without fault. The FBI is comprised of human beings. I will tell you in another discussion, and I touched on this in my book that's coming out, that Comey was not a perfect individual when it came to his judgment and decision making. And I take issue with it. I'm not here to defend people like Pete Strzok, who had the extramarital affair with Lisa Page and made ridiculous texts between the two of them that caused people to perceive the FBI as political. That stuff is painful to any FBI employee. And he deserved to be terminated. But I will tell you that I get worried about long-term damage. I get worried about that agent in the field who has to take out his or her badge, knock on your door, and say, I need help in a kidnapping or child abuse or organized crime case. I get worried about that second you take to wonder whether you can even trust this person. And on a stronger scale, law enforcement's all about developing sources and informants. And sometimes on major cases, terrorism, organized crime, drug cartels, that source is putting his life in your hands. And if the president's going to bash the intel organizations and the federal law enforcement organizations, the ability to be effective can be eroded. And I get very worried about that. Separate from human mistakes, errors, 17 alleged issues with the Carter Page FISA affidavit, people screaming to do away with FISA altogether. Okay, they screwed up in Carter Page's. Let's do away with the ability of the government to spy on terrorists and spies. I don't think that's the way to go there. So, if we're going to talk about government concerns, let's move more local. I am not at all concerned, not at all satisfied. I'll go further. I am convinced that we will have issues in the 2020 election based on election security. This notion that our democracy should be left to Pima County and Omaha and other municipalities to get it right. This is our federal election. And the notion that the Senate will not give authorize all of the money needed to federalize the election of a U.S. president, I don't understand that from a logic standpoint. And so I don't know if you know this, but our vote is in the hands of 3 privately held companies that make all of the voting equipment in America. 3 companies. One of those companies, ES&S, out of Omaha, Nebraska, has a 60% market share of all the voting equipment. And when you look at all 3, I did a special piece for NBC News on this. Cynthia McFadden was the correspondent. She did a great job of research. Went to every one of those 3 companies. You know what their paperwork says when you're a state, local, county registrar of voters and you buy their equipment. And by equipment I mean touch keypads to vote, the routers, we'll talk about that in a second, that transmit your results, where we saw the big problem in Iowa, right? And then the voting machine itself, all of that equipment, when you buy it, and you're looking at the user manual. The last page says, "Thank you for buying our equipment. It's the state of the art in technology and voting. We highly recommend you use paper backup." So, and here's the thing. What real experts are saying now is, and I've been called on the carpet for this because now I say it correctly on TV. It's not just paper backup. Hand-marked paper backup. So a lot of your states and counties are telling you, oh, don't worry. You will walk out of the voting place with a piece of paper that digitally says on it, stamped, you voted for X, right? And we'll keep a paper copy that says you voted for X. Guess what? They've found that screws up a significant portion of the time because it's a machine, right? You ever walk out of the supermarket and go, I didn't buy 12 avocados. I bought 2 avocados. Same thing can happen with that paper backup that says, I didn't vote a straight Republican ticket. So the hand-marked ballot, we're going back to old-fashioned stuff. I put the X there with my hand. I'm walking out with a copy of that. You're keeping a copy of my hand-marked X. That's what the experts are recommending right now. So when I tell, we're talking about government and insecurity, instability, I can't think of a more unstable, insecure issue than our democracy in the next election. And all you need to do is plant a seed, because you'll hear a lot of these companies will tell you, and even if you call and demand answers from your local registrar of voters, and she tells you, oh, no worries, this voting machine can't be hacked. I have 2 responses to that. One is, I've actually seen a voting machine hacked in an experiment. It had to do with line of sight hackers who were actually in the vicinity who could affect that independent voting booth. But more importantly, there's a kernel of truth to that. It's a standalone machine not connected to the internet. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about what we saw in Iowa on a more national scale, and imagine a state-sponsored government doing it to us. So what happened in Iowa was allegedly a technical glitch on an app that transmitted the results. So that's a router. This is where the vulnerability is. That router, often made by Cisco, a major international company. Guess where that comes from? China. And guess what Cisco and the voting equipment company will tell you? They're running scared on this issue. In order to allow quality assurance technicians back at the company to get in and fix and upgrade and patch, there's a back door to that router. They can sit at home and fix. This is good news. They can sit at home and fix through a patch that's allowed in the encrypted router. Well, guess what? If you can fix it, I can break it through that patch. So it's the transmission. And then I often say, it doesn't even matter if it actually happens. All you need is to cast the seed of doubt that happens. So imagine we wake up the next morning after election in November, and a couple precincts in Wisconsin and Ohio go, there's some weird glitch that we think happened here. Oh my God. And that's it. That's all you need. Is just the doubt. Even doubt right beforehand if the primaries are so bad technologically that people stay home in November. It's not going to count. Or the president just says, hey, this was so micro close, this vote with glitches in key places, I'm not going. Yeah.
Very important. I'm going to skip over this.
Okay.
Okay. What can we do to become more aware of and responsible to risk and threat? Can we be more secure?
All right. So this has been a pretty dour discussion so far. And I never like to just throw problems at people without some advice or guidance. And boy, it's getting tougher to have advice and guidance. But look, there's good news and bad news. I think that instability and insecurity and ambiguity are here to stay. That's the new norm. The the bad news. The good news is I'm seeing institutions, the American people, start to morph and change. I'm seeing resiliency here. We're more educated than ever before about the online threats, the voting issues. We're demanding answers from our leaders. I spent some time in Iowa doing some public speaking. I was very impressed, absent their tech problems, with the people of Iowa. These people volunteer. They run for office. They take their caucus extremely seriously, and they do it in a civil fashion. You don't throw food at each other. And I'm very impressed with that. We all have to take that model and volunteer and get more engaged and help out with Registrar of Voters. And League of Women Voters here in Tucson is a phenomenal organization. All of that. Understand what it is you have to protect in your business, your kids' business, your grandkids' business. On a personal level, as I said, get your news from at least 3 sources. Be more educated about what other people are thinking.
Okay. We've got a president who is now impeached, divided Congress, a deeply divided population, and adversaries threatening our way of life. Are we going to make it?
Are you like a Las Vegas odds maker on whether we're going to make it or not? So I always like to end on a positive note, which is getting more and more hard to do. But here's what I say. I like to take my FBI experience and apply it whenever I can, because it was extremely educational. I see people, it's human nature to think that the crisis we're in is the worst crisis ever. But you've seen that throughout history. We're never going to make it. This is the worst ever. And I'm here to say this is different. What we're experiencing now is different, but I can't say it's the worst ever. Think about what this country has lived through. We lived through civil war, presidential assassinations, presidential impeachments, right? The Vietnam era and the 60s of protests and police stations being bombed and National Guard on campus shooting kids. And we made it through, and some would say we made it through stronger than ever before. So what I get worried about and what I saw the FBI do right in my career was when the unprecedented happened, we stayed with what got us there in the first place. Meaning, for example, at 9/11, I was the #2 guy in the Miami office. As the flight manifest came in on that morning of those airplanes, and we learned that 14 of the 19 hijackers had come from South Florida, right? In our backyard. And the entire FBI had to turn into a massive investigative machine and then had to strategically change not into an investigative machine, but a predictive analysis intelligence agency that could predict what was going to happen and stop it. We didn't say, this has never happened before. We never had aircraft crash into buildings for terrorism. We're going to throw out the book. We don't know what to do. We didn't say that. We said, this is a very complex investigation. We know how to investigate very well. We're going to do that. Less than a month later, I became the on-scene commander for the first anthrax murder in the history of the United States. We didn't say, this has never happened before. We've never had a guy killed by anthrax. We never walked in to collect evidence to a 3-story, 60,000 square foot building filled with anthrax spores. We don't know what to do. Woe is me. You know what we said? This is a complex crime scene. We've collected evidence in crime scenes before. We know how to do hazmat. We're going to do it. Here's my point. Our democracy is a fragile experiment. Look at what scientists do when they experiment. If the experiment's going weird on them, they don't run out of the room. So this has never happened before. They say, we're going to stick to sound scientific principles so that we come out with a defensible outcome that we can be proud of. We need to stick with sound democratic principles like the Constitution, the rule of law, right? And our institutions, where our values are wrapped up, not in people, but in the institution. If we stick with them and fight like hell for them, we will come out of this and potentially come out of it even better than we are.
Okay, we're going to take about a 6-minute break.
Oh, good.
Then we'll have questions.
Lloyd has put a huge bowl of Tums out for everybody.
To combat what they're doing in Latin America with building the new ports and new infrastructure? Comments?
Yes. So China has a grand global strategic plan. They do it very well. They have a 5-year plan that actually was very helpful to our intelligence community because it's a fascinating methodology. They pretty much broadcast to their citizens and therefore the world what the plan is for the next 5 years. And we're caught up in election cycles, and they're not. And so this turns into, in my line of work, a 5-year shopping list plan that means all hands on deck. We're all going to collect over here. So, for example, that is a forecast should be for American companies and for the American government. Oh, thank you very much for telling us what your plan is. We should be countering that. On a corporate level, I was very involved in telling corporations, I don't know if you know this, but what you do for a living, low cryo magnet MRI machines, is on the 5-year collection plan for China. That means look out, because they're coming at you every which way from Sunday. They'll have people penetrating you. They'll have employees recruited. They'll have a cyber hacking. On a global level, as you point out, that now involves rare earth metals. They're cornering the market. You talk about Latin America. Look at what China is doing in Africa and what Russia is doing in Africa to strategically position themselves with military installations, China with rare earth metals. And we sit here and we say, yep, our pharmaceuticals are made over there. Or in our backyard in Latin America. They're establishing listening posts and eavesdropping posts. And it seems to me that we lack a cohesive foreign policy to counter this. And we're afraid to say, we keep hearing America first. But America first means also extending that concept around the world so that we can continue to be first, or we won't be for very long. So you're correct in your observation that, yes, there's a grand plan, China, and I would say to a lesser extent Russia, and we don't seem to have our act together with regard to countering that plan.
Getting back to the local level, a friend of mine who used to work for the State Department had talked to me about the Confucius Center. And I was reading this morning or listening this morning that they're closing our local Confucius Center and other sites around I guess related to other campuses in other parts of the other cities. And he had said that it was a recruiting place of the Chinese government for people who are sympathetic to China. So what's your take on that?
Yep, I just found this out as you did this morning as I was coming in here, that the University of Arizona has closed its Confucius Institute. And I was a part, I have to be careful not to get into classified, I was a part of the FBI's program to look at the question of Confucius Institutes. What are they? Why are they affiliating with colleges and universities? Why was there one, for example, when I was the head of the FBI in Northern Ohio? Why was a Confucius Center opening in Cleveland, right? And on its face, ostensibly, the Confucius Centers are a way of spreading culture and language and exposing the American citizenry to the Chinese culture, language, and it sounds very, very nice. In some instances, we saw it exploited. We saw that the head of the Confucius Institutes were often handpicked by the government. Shouldn't surprise anybody. And that they would have to report back on what they were doing. And then we saw it, so that was kind of by the time I left the Bureau, we were concerned. We were saying, we're not seeing some really bad things. We're seeing contact with Chinese government and Chinese intelligence that bother us, but we haven't figured this out yet. And then we saw the Confucius Institutes move on campus. Now we saw a much tighter targeting of research universities. And we're going to give you money. Because you know what? Free of charge, we're going to teach your students Chinese language. And, you know, we really would love to teach the graduate research students language. And, you know, we're going to have a staff here that involves Chinese nationals. And increasingly, we saw the government connection there. And we saw a targeting and a strategy that troubled us. Is there a smoking gun that says this guy was recruited to do this illegally through this Confucius Institute? Not quite. But the foreign funding issue is what's causing universities to go, hold on a minute. You're taking a lot of handouts from a foreign government. We don't have much answers. And we're not sure there's full disclosure on all the money you're getting and what we're getting. Why, you know, what are we getting for this? We're giving them space on campus. They're giving us some money. Our kids are exposed. And there's a lot of questions. And it's really come up not on for universities closing their centers. It's not really about spying. It's really about there's an influx of foreign money that's disturbing, and we have to figure this out.
I was wondering, what do you think about making the Justice Department independent?
Hold on a second. Hold on.
Like the FCC?
Hold on. The Justice Department is and always has been independent.
But the leadership of the Justice Department is not. And
the
it's
Justice
politicized.
Department leadership is and always has been independent. If right now in our history that's not the case, then it's badly broken, and it's time for the Attorney General to leave. And I was one of over 2,000 DOJ officials who signed a letter saying that it's time for Attorney General Barr to resign. He has turned himself into a lawyer for the president, not America's lawyer, which is what our Attorney General is supposed to be. The notion that he would even entertain the president intervening in a sentencing recommendation, tweeting publicly against judges, jurors, and prosecutors is unacceptable for the Attorney General. And if I had to pick the one thing of all that's happened in the last 3 years, the compromise of the Attorney General position in the Department of Justice is the most disturbing, because the backbone of our democracy is rule of law. And so I don't mean to point out, you know, you said, what do I think about making the Department of Justice independent? I love it. It's supposed to be. And I will, now this is where I want to say something, because we talked about watching the other networks and learning how people with different opinions think from us. And it's really important, because if you watch some of the talking heads on say Fox News, and I've studied this, and by the way, I've studied deeply before I signed off on that letter cavalierly to call for the resignation of our Attorney General. I studied all of his writings and speeches because I want to know where he comes from. Yeah, and because I don't want to just, this is a big deal for me. I have great respect for the office of the Attorney General. There's a different school of thought here, which is that no, this is kind of a new thought in my opinion, but the Department of Justice is simply part of the executive branch of government. The head of the executive branch is none other than the president. He gets to dictate what DOJ does. And now, even more interestingly, I saw this 2 years ago. Those of us in the FBI caught this immediately. People started introducing the president as the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. And I'll tell you where I first caught it. And it was in 2017, I think it was December of 2017, the president traveled to Quantico, Virginia, and gave a speech at the FBI Academy to a graduating class of police officers, not FBI agents. And then the Attorney General was Jeff Sessions. And he gets up, and I'm tuned into this because this is cool. The president's talking at the FBI Academy. I know it very well. And he gets up there, and Jeff Sessions introduces the president as your chief law enforcement officer. And I immediately, I know some of the FBI officials that are in the back of that auditorium. And I text them, and I go, what did he say? And they said, holy cow, he screwed up. He screwed up. It is not among the enumerated powers of the president. There are enumerated powers. Chief law enforcement officer isn't one of them. The chief law enforcement officer is the attorney general. So this is a deliberate strategy now. Sessions did it. I've seen Barr do it. And on one of those famous White House lawn helicopter press conferences, he said, I guess I'm the chief law enforcement officer. Oh, no, you're not. So don't become numb to that. That's a grab for the DOJ. So, yeah, you got me passionate on that one.
I'm over here.
Yes, sir.
There's been a lot in the news about some Democratic server been hacked, in the last election. A Democratic.
Was there some news about that?
Yeah. My question is, the federal government is a huge operation. There are lots of computer systems in there. And a few years ago, there were articles about different departments looking at new computer systems, and they were a disaster. Is there any comment you can make about the current security within the various government agencies, the federal government, as far as their computer systems? In other words, aren't these being hacked as well? Attempts are made, and is there anything you can tell us?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of observations. First, let's remember, you've made an interesting equation, which is you talked about the DNC hack, and then you said government in the same sentence. The DNC, but it's important. The DNC is not the government, and I will be very candid with you. Their computer security was awful. It was horrific. And as the story goes, they had several warnings from the FBI that we see hacking occurring, and they blew it off. They looked at it and they went, "We don't see anything." And then there's a lot of back and forth on this story about, some low-level FBI agent called some low-level IT guy and told him about the hack, and you should have had the director call the head of the DNC. Yeah, probably so. They've hired some amazing, since then, they've hired some amazing IT people. Like they went to Silicon Valley and they got the head of Dell and other computer, and they are now at the DNC. So the government, let's go to that. But the first time ever that I was notified that my personal data was hacked was when the Chinese broke into the Office of Personnel Management computers and took every background investigation of every federal employee. That's the first time I was told, yep, your stuff is gone. So things have been made better. But look, there is no foolproof system. If Equifax can get breached like that, and half of Americans have their data stolen, there's no way. There's no way. You're as good as your last breach. And there's problems and fixes with firewalls and who makes the firewalls that protect you against that, and the attacks of a major corporation. Something like at any internet connected computer, your home computer, by the end of this day, there will be 2,000 attempts to hack into your home computer. Yours. Just one. By the end of today. At a major corporate level. And this, by the way, this is the same for government. Pick your government agency, CIA, or a company. I saw at a major U.S. company, 1,000 times a second, somebody pinged their firewall trying to get in. 1,000 times a second. So, that malware antivirus protection you buy for your computer is working like, it's on life support. It is bouncing, it's like a hockey goalie. It's bouncing the attempts out constantly. So it's a constant, we're at war. We are at war. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the intellectual property theft? I'm kind of curious about that. When you say the information's gone, does that mean it's just not usable anymore? They have it and they're going to do something. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I find that kind of interesting.
Right. It means that the adversary has it, and so one of the worst case examples I dealt with happened to be in Ohio, where there was a manufacturing company that employed like half of the town. I mean, it was a major employer. And they had a way of manufacturing their product that was different than anyone in the world. And that was their bread and butter. They had a South Korean employee who was disgruntled about promotion and pay. And he gets approached by the South Korean government officials. And they offer him some money. They stroke his ego. You're important. You're an engineer. You have the secret. And he meets clandestinely with them about 7 times. Niagara Falls, Las Vegas. And they pay him every time he gives up a bit of the formula to this product. At the end of this operation, 7 meetings, they had everything they needed to start up in Korea, their own company to do this. And in the height of irony, the only thing that could save the U.S. company from them outproducing, right, owning it, because remember, we're talking largely about companies that are subsidized by their government. So you say, well, so what if now they know how to make the inside of a Coke can better than we do, or the same as we do? We'll compete with them. No, their government is subsidizing their company. They're going to produce it faster and cheaper than you because they dip into the government pocket. Same thing happened with this Ohio company, to the point where they had to buy the South Korean company that stole their formula. Yeah, at great expense. It almost bankrupted them. They had to buy the company that stole that the government gave their formula to. So it's an existential threat to jobs when you lose that crown jewel and that formula. And because China will make it better and faster. Because the government's behind them. Yeah, and if you now do this in the pharmaceutical area, right? There's some amazing work being done on cures for various types of cancers and diseases. Now imagine that being controlled by a foreign adversarial government that says, no, we've got this. We'll decide the market for this, the price for this, and we're only going to give it to our friends. That's the control factor and the economic factor and the job impact that comes when your intellectual property is stolen. And so if you spent years, $106 million, and years developing this BPA-free lining to your can, and you're about to launch it, and it's going to revolutionize the shelf life, the quality of the soft drink in there, no degradation of the drink, etc. It's going to revolutionize the American company. And now, no, China's going to do it. And they're going to do it cheaper. And now the world market has 2 places they can go for their cans, and one of them's cheaper. That's the problem. Yeah.
My question requires a brief prelude, so I've written it down so I don't dither. Several years ago, in the era before Donald Trump, I call it BDT, I took a class here from one of our gifted SGL study group leaders about the danger to our society of hyper-partisanship. The text he chose for the class was Who Stole the American Dream by Hedrick Smith, a highly regarded author and Washington-based journalist. In the front matter of the book was a quote from Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. He wrote, "We must make our choice. We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. We cannot have both." He was talking about the late 19th century, early 20th century America, a period known as the Gilded Age. The era ended in the crash of 1929, which ushered in the Great Depression. My question to you is, if Brandeis was right then about the danger to democracy, how bad is our peril now when the gap between the super rich and the rest of us is so much greater?
Okay. So Yeah. You, as you correctly pointed out, entire books have been written on this. And by the way, it's funny you should bring this up. I may regret this, but I actually signed up to moderate 2 panels at the upcoming Tucson Book Festival. And the topics are what you just touched on. So the bad part is now Frank has to read 6 books by, I think, March 13 or something, whenever it is. I don't know if you're going, I have Sunday panels. Malcolm Nance is coming from MSNBC, and yeah. So the topics of many of the books relate kind of to this issue, which is how did we get here? There's a lot of that's going to go on in these discussions. How do we fix it? How do we fix it? Those 2 questions touch on your notion of, or Brandeis's notion of, the polarization, but not only polarization of mindset and culture, but now polarization in wealth, class, and education, and the exploitation of that gap by both sides, by the way. And one of the eye-opening experience I had in my life was, I had many in the FBI, but post-FBI, I was a corporate security executive for General Electric. General Electric was, and still is, a major sponsor of every Olympic Games. So yours truly got to go for extended periods of time, including over a month during the Olympics, to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Somebody had to do it. But I have to tell you, as much fun as I had, and there's great beaches, although they're extremely polluted, what was eye-opening to me, and GE has an actual real physical presence in Brazil for oil and gas and all kinds of things. The violent threat there is astounding. And why? The haves and the have-nots. So the thing that hits most Americans when they get to really do more than just the tourist thing, get around safely, you see the favelas, the ghettos, and right next door to a favela with 100,000 poverty-stricken people living in shacks with no water, living off the grid. Next door, $2 million condo building. And what does that translate to in daily life? Everybody I encountered, every cop, security guy, GE guy, gal, Olympic guest, you ever experienced violence in your life living down here? Oh yeah, been shot, been stabbed. Every single one of them. And you'd witness crime just Copacabana Beach, walking down the side, beautiful sidewalk. Kid would come by on a bicycle and grab a necklace off something. We told people, no, don't wear any jewelry. It's going to happen. And it would happen. So I came back from there convinced that if we don't do something about this gap, and by the way, I'm a capitalist. I am not a socialist. I don't want to, that's not me. But I'm telling you, there's going to be a problem if this gap continues to grow. And it will manifest itself in many ways. One of it would be violent crime, as the have and have-nots continue to grow. The other thing on the exploitation of these differences is how we got to Trump. And again, the 6 books I'm reading, a couple of them are focused on how we got there, how we got here, and the exploitation of racial and socioeconomic differences, and the exploitation of fear of the other, right? But this bizarre thing is occurring where the have-nots, who should be going, hey, I need help. I need help with college. I can't pay my bills. I don't have health care. They're voting to not have it. So it's going to be a fun book festival. I don't have any answers, but I tell you this: the key elements are the polarization is much of it's based on fear, and unfortunately, if you study the roots of this, there's racial components to it, and that are troubling, and we've got to understand that our democracy has to be inclusive, or we'll lose our democracy. Yeah.
What puzzles me is that every week or so we see in the paper that Trump has done some other outrageous thing, something that he really has no right to do. And yet, where's the response? Where's the reaction? I mean, like your chief law enforcement officer comment, where was something the next day saying, wait, that's a mistake, or he's not?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there no way to stop a president from doing things that are over the line?
So look, in a nutshell, this I get asked this all the time on the air, and you've heard the phrase constitutional crisis, right? It's which means to me the inability of our three branches and the Constitution to resolve our problem. And I think we're pretty much there. So you ask, can something be done? Here's the problem. Under normal operating circumstances, right? You know how you might buy a product, I don't know, you might buy a go-kart or a washing machine, and if you read the instructions, all of this is dependent on normal use. Don't ride your go-kart upside down. We're riding upside down right now. And so under the norm, if the norm is followed, it works. When Bob Mueller is special counsel and he says, I'm going to play by the rules because there's a memo that says you can't prosecute criminally the president, so I'm really not going to dig into that. And then Barr says, no crime. And Mueller goes, no, I didn't look at that. I didn't look. I had 10 examples of obstruction of justice. I didn't charge them because you can't. Yep, no crimes. So when Congress says we have subpoenas and you're supposed to comply, and the White House goes, we don't recognize that branch of government or your power of subpoena, the system is broken. And when the president says to two Supreme Court justices this week, you'll have to recuse yourself on my upcoming cases, then the Supreme Court now can't solve it, which, by the way, is what we're all looking toward is the judiciary. So we can only solve it if the rules are followed, and the rules aren't being followed. And I believe that constitutes a crisis. And so either we're watching our democracy be reformed, and the concept of three equal branches, and I strongly believe this, we've lost the concept of three equal branches. There's no teeth there. And we may be reshaping the office and power of the president with help from Barr as a strong unitary executive. So I actually think when history looks back at this 20, 50 years from now, they're going to go, yeah, this is when American democracy actually transmogrified into something slightly different. Yeah. So I don't have the answer into what, you have to vote somebody out. If you want it like it used to be, then you need to vote somebody out. Right, recovering, yeah, it could get even worse. This is the hijacking. This will come up during the Tucson Book Festival, by the way, but it's the hijacking of the Senate and the Republican Party. The history of this goes back to the Tea Party, and the candidates that were put up that got Speaker of the House Boehner out and Eric Cantor out and replaced with radical thinkers like Jim Jordan and Devin Nunes. So that's one of the books is on this topic, and sadly it's 650 pages. But it's a fascinating history of how the Republican Party was hijacked by the radical thinkers. So now you talk about polarization. Here we are, radical Tea Party. They don't call themselves Tea Party anymore. Radical, yeah, they're conservatives. Yeah. Conservative used to mean small government and balanced budget. Oh well, but now we have a democratic socialist on one end and Tea Party on the other. We are polarized, and we're watching a transformation of our government. Can we get back to the old way? I don't know. Oh, which one? Oh God, there's one called Equality and Democracy. Another one is called Merge Left. And let's see, Malcolm Nance is The Battle to Destroy America. And then Tim, the one I'm in now, which is 650 pages, is written by an author named Tim Alberta. And it's something like The Fight for the Republican Party, something like that. So Tim Alberta. Yeah. Yeah, they'll all be here at the festival.
So you alluded to this earlier about the possibility of the upcoming election of Trump not being reelected.
I wait a minute. Did I talk about Trump not being reelected?
Well, okay.
Because I'm not. That's not where my money is.
Okay.
But.
So let's say that the results show that he's not reelected, but he won't leave.
Yeah.
What mechanisms, if any, do we have for him to leave, to be taken out of the White House?
Look, I'm not. So first, I want to say this. I will answer your question as best as I can, but I also want to caveat it by saying I try very hard these days to avoid any appearance that I'm part of a conspiracy theorist. I'm tired of conspiracy theories. You know, Rudy Giuliani and Ukraine, and I don't need conspiracy theories. So I don't want to be alarmist. I don't want to imply that we're going to have, you know, him clinging to the Resolute desk, but there are scenarios that people are asking about, and you know, they're not implausible. This guy, sometimes just to tweak us, will get up publicly and say, you know, Trump 2026, Trump 2024, you know, yeah, Trump forever, you know, and he'll say things like, boy, I like what that guy in China did. He's a president for life. I like what Putin did. He's still there. That's worrisome. So what would, you know, and then there are even people with, you know, the coronavirus saying, if this gets bad, he's going to suspend voting because people can't congregate in places. And I will tell you, there are plans. The federal government always has had plans to deal with mass epidemic. And at some point, the plans include canceling public events like ball games and stadiums and arenas and concerts. And that makes a lot of sense. What worries people is, does that mean you don't congregate in a gymnasium to vote? I don't know. But the other scenario would be technological glitches, hacking, that cause him to doubt the outcome, cause everybody to doubt the outcome. What's this? So here we go to the remedy. The Supreme Court, who's done this before with an election, Bush v. Gore, would have to go to the courts, and what a mess with our courts. And it would have to work its way up. Trump has appointed nearly 200 federal judges right now. This would largely all go through the D.C. circuit, go right up to the Supreme Court quickly, if not immediately. And you know how divided that court seems to be right now. And then they would issue an order. Who carries out the orders of a federal court? The United States Marshals. So the United States Marshals would have to, I mean, if you refused, I don't think we're going there, but if he literally physically refused, the U.S. Marshals would serve an order on him. And then if they had to physically remove him, they would physically remove him. He's also said recently, you know, there's also been indications on the other side of the argument that he's fed up with the job. And that, you know, he made a comment recently, if I don't get elected, you'll never see me again. So, you know, so he might just go. He might just go. But the court and the U.S. Marshals.
Yeah,
he's not earning any salary. What are you talking about?
You painted some dour pictures, and I'm more curious about if we get somebody who is back to normal again, what you see happening with our foreign intelligence expertise, with the State Department and the lack of some people that are there, the military loss of some leadership and what have you.
Yeah.
You didn't say State Department, but we've heard, you know, that there are many people that have left there. Then, so how do we get back to normal, particularly with our allies?
There's good news here in that with the right replacement leader, if the right person comes in with the right leadership and recognizes the terrible damage that's been done, this can be rebuilt fairly quickly. The institutional memory, the muscle memory of our institutions is powerful. And you can rebuild quickly. First, get rid of all the political appointees, which are myriad. They're often like the entire top floor of a State Department or, you know, the DOJ. And you just say, all of you are turning in your resignation. That's very common with any new administration. And then in the intelligence community, you likely have to reset the collection taskings. You have to say, this is what we're doing. Immediately, you've got to bring in our allies. And you've got to say, there's a new sheriff in town. We have your back. You have ours. And we're going to go back to what we had. You can do this with the right leadership. I get concerned, though. What I just put out there under the best case scenario involves the Senate flipping. I hope so. Involves the Senate flipping, because I don't care which side you're on. If you want to change rapidly back and restore the damage, you gotta have the Senate on your back, because it's gonna with you, and it's gonna involve their money and their funding. So it's gonna. What we don't need is a battle to restore. Because if you've got, let's say you rename your Secretary of State, you rename your DNI, you rename your national security, of course you do. But when they start coming up with that real intelligence, hey, North Korea is building a missile, and the Senate says, don't want to hear it, don't believe it, deep state, you know, Saudi Arabia poisoned, chopped up a journalist. Don't want to hear it. Deep state, Saudi's our friend. That's the problem, because they'll still control the Senate Intelligence Committee.
We're running close to the end. However, I understand the class after this has been canceled, so Frank is willing to stay a few more minutes to answer questions.
Did you know that, Frank?
What's the next class? I'll teach the next class. What is it?
Frank, I'd like to take the conversation back into something a little less, supposedly a little less controversial, and that is technology transfer. And, you know, there's been a movement in American universities for the last 30, 40 years to get them more involved in moving stuff out of the laboratory and into the marketplace.
That's right. Profit.
And profit and keeping science relevant too. And a lot of, I've been involved in that, and a lot of my best deals that were available were with international companies, foreign companies, not based in China mostly, but based in Europe, because they were looking for new ideas. A lot of times we had to toilet train them about how they're supposed to work with universities. But the other thing is that the export control system that the federal government had set up was fairly relaxed, I think. And it was fairly easy in a lot of these fields, particularly the life sciences, to essentially get past that barrier with the proper reporting. Has that changed in the last few years, or is it different, say, in the natural sciences, the physical stuff that really relates to engineering technology?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we are, as we talked about earlier, we are seeing research universities increasingly attempt to monetize their research, and that's great. I think you have to know your customer. The due diligence is not happening enough. I think they see dollar signs in their eyes. So again, I've seen research universities spin off technology to front companies for foreign powers. And it's not just, we talked a lot about China and Russia today. It's France, it's South Korea, it's Israel. And you really don't know who you're dealing with. So that's one side of it. The other thing is you don't truly understand what I call the notion of acceptable loss. What is it that you've invented or discovered? What are the dual uses? Do you really understand what you're giving away? And is it a loss that you deem acceptable? And when you get up to the export control issues, you know, I used to sit on the U.S. government's foreign investment, CFIUS, it's called, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And we used to look at this from a different angle, which is, wait a minute, this Israeli company's coming in to buy this service. And it could be innocuous. The government, that foreign government's coming in to buy this travel agency. Who cares? The travel agency is the official U.S. travel agency of the United States government for federal employee travel. Oh, we care a lot about that. They know everywhere everybody's going and when they're going. So there's a committee that figures that out. We don't necessarily have the same coverage of the other way around, which is we're handing this technology to these people over here for profit. We don't know if we want them to have it. And the university is left alone largely to make that decision. When you talk about export control, you're largely talking about components for military use, right? So this widget, this vibration sensor, we make a vibration sensor for construction sites. It lets us know if we're going to affect the brick buildings next door when we're building the site. It's innocuous. No, Iran wants that badly for when they test their nuclear devices underground to see how powerful the nuclear explosion was underground. That vibration sensor you use to construct a supermarket is a nuclear program desire of Iran. So there's not enough of that vetting going on. And it's a gap, and I think the government needs to step in more, particularly in what I call this pre-classified area. Yeah.
Frank, let's take a break for a couple of minutes so people of other classes can leave, and then those who want to remain, we'll just have a couple more minutes for questions.
Yeah. Or people in the next class that's canceled can come in.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Thank you, Meg. Thanks for coordinating. Really nicely done.
Sorry.
Loud and clear.
Sorry. This question concerns following the money and concerns the Mueller report. He reported on conspiracy and obstruction, and I was surprised that there was no report or investigation, as far as I could tell, of following financial connections, for example, between the Trump administration and Russia. And do you know anything about that?
Yeah. Look, there's lots of dismay and questions around the special counsel inquiry and his scope. And it appears that he deliberately limited himself. I worked for Bob Mueller. I briefed him every morning when I was assistant director. And it appears that he did the Mueller thing, which was he stayed to his remit. And he was asked to look into Russia and the campaign. And he didn't keep expanding. He spun off quite a bit, smartly, I think, particularly to Southern District of New York and other U.S. Attorney's offices, District of Columbia. And he did it again with the naive hope that they would play by the rules. So I think necessarily the team limited themselves to the big questions and not to, is Jared profiting off of this? How much did Moscow Tower, play into, his motivation to work with Russia? It was this, and occasionally he would file a request to expand scope, but it was very limited. And so we're left to U.S. Attorney New York, State Attorney General New York, and District Attorney Manhattan to do it. Look what's happened in the District of Columbia, the U.S. attorney there. That woman was removed and replaced with a crony of Attorney General Barr's. I have little hope, and 4 people walked away from the Stone case there. So, if you wanted to make an argument against special counsels, you would make the argument that, look, you could literally assign a special counsel for the duration of the Trump campaign to look into every single nuance of every corrupt allegation, and it would probably be extremely detrimental to the nation. On the other hand, you've raised the question of, well, there seems to be a gap. where this stuff has fallen, and we don't know where it remains. Some of it seems to be in New York, both at the federal and state level. But I am not optimistic that all of that's being addressed. I'm just not. You had a guy playing by the rules and a guy who wasn't playing by the rules.
Yeah. I'd like to take it back to Tucson and
Thank you.
I'd like to take it back to Tucson for a minute. And there was a report a couple months ago about the migrants coming through that are no longer allowed to be on U.S. property, and they're being housed in Mexico at the border. And when they get turned away at the U.S. border, they're sent down to a bus stop for Mexico to house all of these migrants. And they're given big, clear plastic bags for their belongings, and they're getting kidnapped at an alarming rate because people know that they're going to their families back in the United States. And this came out. Rachel did a huge story on it, Maddow, and then it disappeared. And I'm just wondering whether the Mexican government is. I know the U.S. administration, the Trump administration, doesn't care. But what's happening now is that the Mexican government doesn't seem to care about this, and these people are getting kidnapped and held for ransom, and then their families in the U.S. are paying the ransom, and they're given a code word so that the next time they get kidnapped, they can escape that. But my question is there any pressure on the Mexican government at all to help calm this situation down at all?
Yeah, I wish that I had optimistic news for you, but you've already answered your question when you said that it appears that the U.S. government simply doesn't care. And I'll go a step further. What you just described is helpful to a strategy. I'm not saying that it's part of the American plan to have these people kidnapped, but rather it's helpful to the American strategy of border security to have people kidnapped, frightened, and their families in the U.S. victimized and extorted, because what does that do? It has an incredibly chilling effect on trying to do it again, trying to cross the border again. So the only thing that would come into play in terms of American law would be that an American citizen here is being extorted. The problem is they're being extorted by somebody who is across the border, and there's very little the FBI or federal law enforcement can do about that. So it's not a pretty picture.
And they can get shot too, right at the border.
Yeah, exactly. No recourse. Yeah. How about
Frank?
One more?
Yeah, Frank.
Yeah.
It used to be a great honor to be asked to join the FBI and be vetted and start and work your way up.
Yep.
What's happening to new people wanting to come in?
Mm-hmm.
Are you getting new people because of what's going on? They're kind of like, why bother?
Yep.
Is it really having a major effect on recruits?
So the answer to that question has changed in the last several months, and it's a good news story for now. Recruiting was abysmal in the past couple of years. The numbers had dropped off significantly. A large part of that was that the economy was doing well, and young, talented people could find greater income outside of the government. That's true whenever the economy is doing well. In addition, though, the numbers were dropping off, I believe, because people just didn't want to sign up for this aggravation and get bashed every day. But recently, the news has changed, and there's been quite a recruitment initiative by the FBI, and it's worked. And so the numbers are through the roof for FBI candidates. I have to think that while there's many factors involved, and the FBI has changed its recruitment methodology, they're recruiting kind of the new agent. It's not the shiny shoes, short haircut guy they're looking for anymore. They've gotten with the program, right? They need that long-haired computer hacker kid. That's fine. But also, I believe that young people are saying, enough is enough. I'm going to fight for our Constitution and democracy. I'll take that oath of office. because I want to help be a part of the solution. And the numbers are way up. Yeah.
Could we have just one last question?
All right, one just for you. This is going to be the hardest question. I can see it coming.
You made a comment that we haven't vetted properly the current Democratic candidates. What can you tell us as to how we can do that research? What do we Google? What can we do to find out what we need to know?
I'm not going to name any names. You'll figure it out. But look, I'm not a politician. It's an important part of my identity on television to not be political, but I am all about national security and vetting. And so I still get a lot of Americans who come to me. They're not as savvy as this crowd, but they'll say, Frank, I don't understand. How did this president get a security clearance? Or they go, I don't understand. How did this Congress member ever get his security clearance? Didn't you guys vet this person? And the answer is, of course not. We are a democracy. If you elect your representatives, we give them the clearance. This isn't the FBI, right? The FBI, these people would never get in. If you elect a president, we don't conduct a background investigation. You elect your Congress member, we don't conduct a background. You want us in charge of who you vote for? You don't want that either. It's up to you and the media. So from a national security perspective, I say, since I happen to view this president as a national security threat, I've said that on television, I look at it through that lens, not the political lens. And I say we made a mistake as a public, and the media dropped the ball in not vetting this president properly. The stories that they could have come out with, and luckily, again, kind of playing by the nice rules. We've talked about playing by the nice rules. Some producer with journalistic integrity went, oh, come on now, we're going to publish that story about that? Yeah, they should have. So are we going to repeat history again? Well, I'm just throwing this out there. The information is public, if you want to find it, about who some of these candidates are and who they might be and whether we're going to repeat history again. And so it's there if you dig. People's research, people's writings, people what they wrote, where they went for their honeymoon, why they decided to have a sister city relationship with a city in Russia, whether there's a candidate out there still out there, a female who refuses to renounce the Russian help she's getting on bots and trolls. It's out there. I don't think the media is doing enough to vet that. That's my personal opinion.
Okay, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.